Dear students, let us start the discussion on today's newspaper, that is 27th January 2017. The first article, Rolling Back Ordinance Raj. Here we will be learning about an ordinance, when an ordinance can be enacted, and what is the Supreme Court judgment in Krishna Kumar Singh case. Now, ordinance can be simply stated as a law of executive. You know that our constitution is based on the principle of separation of powers. Under this, the law-making power exclusively belongs to the legislature. But whenever there are exceptional circumstances, when the parliament is not in session, then President of India, if satisfied, can issue an ordinance. This ordinance will have an equal effect of a law while it is in force. So in this context, the governments, they started misusing this ordinance making power whenever they did not enjoy the sufficient majority in the upper house. When they felt that upper house may act as an obstruction to the law-making activity, then they deviated the democratic rule of deliberation and resorted to the ordinance making power. It went to such an extreme that the government of the day, it started proroguing the house to make an ordinance. The recent example for this is in the case of land acquisition law. The Rajya Sabha has opposed to the amendments of the land acquisition law, and government has resorted to the ordinance thrice to get its things passed. Now, what will happen to the actions taken by the government when ordinance is in operation? Normally, an ordinance shall be placed before the house after its reassembly within 6 weeks. Then after, if the house do not approve the ordinance, it will die. But what will happen to the actions taken in the mean period? So they will have equal effect as like the law. So in this context, the governments, they started making an ordinance and repealing them and remaking an ordinance so that they can avoid the legislative scrutiny. In a way, it is a fraud against democracy and the constitution. In Bihar, the same thing has happened with regard to the Sanskrit schools, and the teachers of these Sanskrit schools have challenged that in Supreme Court. Supreme Court has clearly stated that the ordinance making of the President of India in the very first instance is also subjected to judicial review. It means it is not the re-promulgation of the ordinance. Promulgation of the ordinance in the very first instance itself is subjected to judicial review. In this, it will not verify the sufficiency of the material facts, but it will look into the situations. Is there any fraud on the constitution? And second thing is, what happens to the actions when ordinance is in operation? Does ordinance create any permanent rights or liabilities to the people? So in this context, the Supreme Court has differentiated between the temporary legislation and ordinance. A temporary legislation, yes, it can create a permanent liability or right based on the provisions of the law as it is passed by the legislature. But ordinance is not a temporary legislation. So that is the reason why it cannot create any permanent rights or liabilities on the people or on the government. That's what the Supreme Court judgment clearly states. So in any democracy, the law has to be made through a critical thinking process that involves discussion and deliberation. It shall never be bypassed. So in a nutshell, what I can state is, ordinance is clearly distinct from law in a way that there are certain circumstances need to be satisfied to make an ordinance, and these circumstances shall satisfy the President of India. There is a need for the same. And coming to banking on good faith, remember the word policy paralysis over here. So excessive scrutiny by the investigative agencies, audit, and then the CBI, CVC, CAG. These three are said to be the reasons for the policy paralysis during the UPA government. When accountability is stretched beyond a limit, it leads to and weakness or else inability to take the risk. A risk aversive behavior sets in. Finally, it leads to policy paralysis. Does it can be a reason for not having a due diligence in a circumstance where the public money is involved? So recently, the Supreme Court, the CBI, it has arrested the senior officials of IDBI Bank who have loaned to Mr. Vijay Mallya's Kingfisher Airlines without due diligence. So this is a classical example for banker and borrower nexus, where the borrower pleases the banker to get the loans without sufficient material proof of eligibility. And second thing is, today, if this accountability is sending a wrong signals to the economy that ultimately will lead to policy paralysis and risk aversive behavior from the bankers, and loan disbursals are bound to come down. So, where economic activity is expected to move up, such a situation will be a dangerous condition. So, in this context, the bank borrower nexus has to be fought and honest officers need to be protected. The Prevention of Corruption Act 13(1) subclause D, it has provisions which ensures that if an officer though did not get any gain from a particular situation, but because of this decision, any private individual, if he got a pecuniary benefit, then also it can be stated as corruption. So, section 13 that defines the corruption in Prevention of Corruption Act defines it in a broad terms. So, any judgment or decision of an officer, if it is leading to a gain to a private individual, then it can be considered as corruption. So, this is leading to harassment of the honest officers. So, it has been clearly stated that this has to be amended. Next, setback to climate action plans. Remember, Donald Trump, the President of United States of America, has called the climate change as an expensive hoax, and it is taking away the jobs from United States. So he has approved two important plans. One is to move away from the Paris Pact, and second is to give a boost to the fossil fuel industry. So the Paris Climate Change Pact has clearly stated a goal to keep the rise in the temperature below 2 degrees C and aims to bring it below 1.5 degrees C. In this, the major responsibility shall go to United States because historically it was responsible for the climate change. The President Obama, in his clean developmental plan, has stated that by 2030, the United States will reduce the carbon dioxide emissions by 32% on 2005 levels. All these are expected to be reversed now. So it means that the scientific evidence that correlates the climate change will not be accepted by the United States of America. It is clearly visible on the restrictions imposed on Environmental Protection Agency by the President Trump and approval of two key pipelines that go through Dakota, and the other one is Keystone XL pipelines. So, it is the peace in a process. Peace is a process. Now, I found a very good statement. Peace is a process and not a state. Let us try to understand the Astana peace talks on Syria. The parties to peace talks are the Syrian government and then the rebels. And then this is hosted by three key stakeholders, Iran, Russia and Turkey. In this, we need to understand about the three different things. What is meant by a ceasefire and what are the demands of both the parties? Now, the rebels who are substantially weakened now, they want to have a ceasefire at the national level. So, the Syrian government believes that such a ceasefire will help rebels to recoup their energies. Rather than it is proposing for a ceasefire at the local level. What is the plan of the Syrian government is, wherever it has substantially gained the control, in those areas it will be going ahead with the ceasefire so that it can focus its energies elsewhere. But the rebels are opposed to the same. But the future plan for the peace, It depends on two important things. The rebels' acceptance of the secular state, which they will never accept for, and the second is the Syrian Kurds and their integration into the system. So as of now, the Turkey is worried about the Kurds problem, and the Syrian Kurds are the most active against ISIS. So to provide the space for the Turkey, the Syria has blinded the issues of the Syrian Kurds. So the Syrian Kurds, they are very much dissatisfied with the existing situation. So they might demand for an autonomous region with Syrian Kurdistan along with the Kurdistan in Turkey. So the Kurds problem need to be addressed, and second is the secular state objective need to be achieved for Syria. Now, all the three proxies, that is Saudi Arabia and then Turkey, United States, they have moved away from participating or supporting the rebels to an extent. But two important groups, that is Al-Qaeda-led JFS and ISIS, these two are not participating in the dialogue. It means the wound is still fresh in Syria. And then targeted basic income. Understand the meaning of this. Here we will be looking meaning, positives and negatives, and certain case studies related to that. The targeted basic income, it means that every household will receive certain basic income, and over above that, if he wants to earn, he can earn, or if he wants to stay idle, he can stay idle. So this has been tried in Finland. An experiment is tried in Finland. Recently in Switzerland also, a referendum was being held. So today automation is growing up and immigration is threatening the jobs and safety nets are decreasing for the people. So in this context, these demands for universal basic income is being spoken about. But this article is talking about targeted basic income. But in Switzerland and Finland, what they were talking is the universal basic income. So in Madhya Pradesh in India, also a pilot model is done with the basic income, where 1/3 of the average need per month is given as an issued income. So it has led to increased consumption of meat, pulses and vegetables. Thereby, the health issues of the people have decreased. And second is, it also have increased the people's ability to earn more, unlike the popular belief that the work and worker will not be respected. So the people, once their basic needs are assured, they are focusing on their ability to produce more. That is what is the finding. So, but however, what is the negative to this? The fiscal deficit is going to be widened. Finding the resources is going to be the greatest challenge for this program. And coming to news. So, Mr. Shasha, the ambassador of Russia to India, has passed away. So, he clearly stated India is his karma bhumi, Russia is his birthplace. And he has seen all the important events in India and Russia diplomacy. So, his death can be a great strain on India-Russia relations. Now, the wall. So, Mr. Trump is going with series of actions, what he has promised during the electioneering. So, he is about to bring in a wall across the US and Mexico boundary, and also in the war-torn areas. He is focusing on questioning or else disallowing the immigration. So, these are the issues which we need to focus on. How it will project the US in the world as anti-Islam. It will be stereotyping a particular faith in the world. That's why it is not in accordance with the American values, is the argument of the opponents. So these are the articles for today. Thank you very much and all the best.